The corridors of Kensington Palace were never truly silent. Even in the dead of night, there was always the faint echo of footsteps, soft rustle of curtains, the distant hum of security systems monitoring every corner. But on this particular autumn evening, something felt different. Something felt wrong. Princess Charlotte stood at her bedroom window, her small hands pressed against the cold glass. She was only 8 years old, but her eyes held a seriousness that didn't belong to a child. Below, in the courtyard, she could see him. Officer James Whitfield. The one guard who had always smiled at her. The one who had once picked up her favorite stuffed rabbit when she dropped it during a garden walk. The one who remembered her name wasn't just Princess but Charlotte. And now, he was being escorted away by 2 men in dark suits. Charlotte's heart began to race. She didn't understand why, but every instinct in her body screamed that something terrible was happening. She watched as James turned back toward the palace one last time, his face pale, his jaw tight. For just a moment, their eyes met across the distance. He gave her the smallest nod. Then he was gone. Before we continue with what happened next, if you love stories about courage, loyalty, and the hidden moments behind palace walls, make sure you're subscribed. You won't want to miss where this goes. Charlotte stepped back from the window, her breath fogging the glass. Her mind spun with questions. Why had they taken him? What had he done? The adults around her always spoke in careful, measured tones, never telling her the full truth about anything. But she wasn't a baby anymore. She knew when something was being hidden. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Charlotte lay in her enormous bed, staring at the painted ceiling above her. She thought about the day 3 months earlier when everything had changed. It was a routine morning. She'd been walking through the palace gardens with her governess when a man had appeared from behind the hedgerow. He wasn't supposed to be there. His eyes were wild, his movements erratic. Before anyone could react, James had stepped between Charlotte and the intruder. His voice had been calm but firm. "Stay behind me, princess." The man had lunged forward, and James had moved faster than Charlotte thought possible. Within seconds, other guards had swarmed the scene, but it was James who had kept her safe. James, who had shielded her with his own body. After that day, Charlotte had felt safe whenever James was near. He wasn't like the other guards who stood rigid and expressionless. He was kind. He was real, but now he was gone, and no one would tell her why. The next morning, Charlotte sat through breakfast in the formal dining room, pushing eggs around her plate. Her mother, the Princess of Wales, chatted pleasantly about the day's schedule. Her father reviewed documents while sipping tea. Everything appeared perfectly normal. But Charlotte could sense the tension beneath the surface. The way her mother's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Where is Officer Whitfield?" Charlotte finally asked, her voice small but clear. The room went still. Her mother's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Her father glanced up sharply. "He's been reassigned, darling," her mother said gently. "Nothing for you to worry about." But Charlotte knew a lie when she heard one. And in that moment, she made a decision that would change everything. The days that followed felt hollow. Charlotte went through her usual routines lessons with her tutors. Afternoon tea, carefully supervised playtime with her siblings, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept replaying her mother's words. Reassigned. It was such a cold, empty word. It meant nothing and everything at once. Charlotte began to pay attention in ways she never had before. She noticed the worried glances between staff members. She heard whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered a room. Most importantly, she noticed the new guard who now stood where James used to stand. This man was older, stern-faced, with eyes that never seemed to blink. He didn't smile. He didn't acknowledge her at all. One afternoon, while her governess was distracted with a phone call, Charlotte slipped away. She'd watched the palace guards long enough to know their patterns, the brief moments when hallways went unmonitored. She moved quickly through the servants' passages, narrow corridors that the royal family rarely used, but that she'd explored. Secretly over the years, she found what she was looking for in a small office near the security wing. It was hardly more than a closet, really, filled with filing cabinets and the smell of old paper. But on the desk was an open laptop, its screen still glowing. Someone had left in a hurry. Charlotte knew she shouldn't. She knew this was breaking rules that went beyond simple mischief. But she thought of James's face in the courtyard. The way he'd looked at her one last time, and her fingers moved to the keyboard. She typed his name into the search bar. Officer James Whitfield. What appeared on screen made her stomach drop. There were official reports, incident files, photographs. The words were complicated, full of formal language she didn't entirely understand, but certain phrases jumped out at her. Breach of protocol, unauthorized contact, security risk. And then, buried in a memo near the bottom, recommended for immediate termination and investigation. Charlotte's hands trembled. Investigation? For what? For protecting her? She heard footsteps approaching and quickly closed the laptop, ducking behind the desk just as someone entered the room. Through the gap beneath the desk, she could see polished black shoes. A man's voice spoke into a phone. The situation with Whitfield is contained, the voice said. He won't be a problem anymore. We've made sure of that. Charlotte held her breath, pressing herself smaller. No, sir. The family doesn't know the extent of it. As far as they're concerned, it was a standard reassignment. We can't have them knowing what he found. What he found. Charlotte's mind raced. What could James have possibly found that would get him removed so urgently? The man ended his call and left. Charlotte waited a full minute before emerging from her hiding spot. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. She didn't understand everything she'd heard, but she understood enough. James hadn't done anything wrong. He'd been removed because of something he'd discovered, something the palace wanted hidden. That evening, Charlotte barely touched her dinner. Her mother asked if she was feeling well, and Charlotte nodded, forcing a smile. But inside, her mind was working furiously. She needed to know what James had found. More than that, she needed to help him. But how could an 8-year-old princess possibly do anything against the enormous machinery of palace security and protocol? The answer came to her 2 nights later, in the form of a forgotten memory. 6 months ago, during a charity event, James had spoken to her while standing guard at a garden party. He'd mentioned almost casually that if she ever needed anything, truly needed anything, she could leave a message for him at a specific location. He'd made it sound like a game, a secret between them. At the time, Charlotte had thought it was sweet, but unnecessary. Now, she realized it might be her only chance. The hiding spot James had shown her was inside a loose brick in the old garden wall. The one covered in ivy near the rose bushes. Charlotte had thought it was funny at the time, like something from a spy movie. James had smiled and said, "Sometimes the old ways are the best ways, princess. Technology can be watched, but a brick? Nobody watches bricks." Now, as Charlotte knelt in the damp grass, her fingers searching for that particular brick, those words took on new meaning. Around her, the autumn wind rustled through the palace gardens. It was late afternoon, the hour when her governess took her daily phone call with the household manager. Charlotte had perhaps 10 minutes before anyone noticed her absence. Her fingers found the brick. It shifted slightly. Heart racing, she pulled it free and reached into the small cavity behind it. Empty. Of course it was empty. James was gone. But Charlotte had come prepared. From her pocket, she pulled a small piece of paper. On it, in her careful handwriting, she'd written a simple message. "Why did they send you away? What did you find? I want to help." See, she folded the paper and placed it inside, then replaced the brick. It was a desperate move, probably foolish. James likely had no way to check this spot anymore. But it was all she could think to do. 3 days passed. Charlotte checked the brick each afternoon during her scheduled garden time. Each day, nothing. She began to lose hope. Perhaps James really was gone forever. Perhaps she'd never understand what had happened. Then, on the 4th day, her fingers touched paper. Charlotte's hands shook as she unfolded the note. The handwriting was hurried, the letters pressed hard into the paper. Trust no one at palace. Cameras everywhere. Security breach from inside. Found evidence of threat to family. They removed me to silence it. You must tell your father directly. No one else. Burn this note. Stay safe. Charlotte read the message 3 times, her blood turning cold. A threat to her family? From inside the palace? It seemed impossible. These were the walls that had protected royals for generations. These were the people sworn to keep them safe. She did as the note instructed, using matches from the garden shed to burn the paper in a small ceramic pot. As the paper curled and blackened, Charlotte's mind worked through possibilities. How could she tell her father? She was rarely alone with him. There were always assistants, secretaries, guards hovering nearby. And if James was right about the cameras, about not trusting anyone, then how could she know who was safe? That night, Charlotte lay awake planning. Her father had a routine every evening at 8 o'clock. He spent 30 minutes in his private study reviewing the next day's schedule. It was one of the few times he was truly alone, when even his most trusted staff waited outside. If she could reach him then, she could tell him everything. But getting to that study undetected would require perfect timing and a bit of luck. The next evening, Charlotte told her governess she had a headache and wanted to lie down early. Once alone in her room, she waited, watching the clock on her nightstand. 7:45. 7:50. At 7:55, she slipped out of her room and into the corridor. The palace at night was a different place. Shadows stretched long across marble floors. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch her pass. Charlotte moved quickly, remembering the route she'd mapped in her mind. She took the back staircase, the one used by staff during the day, but usually empty in the evenings. She was almost to her father's study when she heard voices around the corner. Charlotte froze, pressing herself into a small alcove behind a velvet curtain. Through the gap, she could see 2 men in suits, the same dark suits worn by palace security. "The girl's been acting strange," one of them said. "More observant than we expected?" "She's 8 years old," the other replied dismissively. What could she possibly know? Whitfield was fond of her. If he reached out somehow, impossible. We've been monitoring everything. Besides, he knows what happens if he talks. The men moved on, their footsteps fading. Charlotte waited until silence returned, her heart hammering. They were watching her. James was in danger if he talked. This was so much bigger and darker than she'd imagined. But she'd come this far. She couldn't turn back now. Charlotte reached her father's study door just as the clock in the hallway struck 8. Her small hand hovered over the brass handle. This was it. Once she opened this door, there would be no going back. She would have to trust that her father would believe her, that he would know what to do. She knocked softly, then pushed the door open before he could call out. Her father looked up from his desk, surprise crossing his features. "Charlotte, what are you doing out of bed, darling?" Charlotte stepped inside and quickly closed the door behind her. "Papa, I need to talk to you. It's important, and we have to be very quiet." Something in her tone made him set down his pen. He studied her face for a moment, then stood and came around the desk. He knelt down to her level, his expression concerned. "What's wrong?" "It's about Officer Whitfield," Charlotte began, her words tumbling out in a whisper. "He didn't do anything bad. He was protecting us. But he found something evidence of a threat to our family. Someone inside the palace is dangerous, and they got rid of him so he couldn't tell anyone." Her father's face had gone very still. "Charlotte, who told you this?" "He left me a message. In the garden wall, he said to trust no one except you." "Papa, I heard the security men talking. They're watching me. They think I might know something." For a long moment, her father said nothing. Charlotte watched his face, trying to read his thoughts. Was he angry? Did he think she was making it up? Then something shifted in his expression, a hardening around his eyes, a tightness in his jaw. "Show me exactly where he left the message," he said quietly. They couldn't go together, that would be too obvious. Instead, her father gave Charlotte careful instructions. She would go back to her room now, naturally, as if he'd simply sent her to bed. Tomorrow morning, during her usual garden time, she would check the hiding spot. If there was anything new from James, she would take it and bring it to breakfast, hidden in her school book. At breakfast, she would accidentally leave the book on her chair when she got up. Her father would retrieve it, It felt like a real spy mission now, frightening and thrilling at once. That night, Charlotte dreamed of dark corridors and watching eyes. She woke several times, heart pounding, certain she'd heard footsteps outside her door. But morning finally came, gray and cold through her windows. The garden time felt endless. Charlotte's governess chatted about the day's lessons while Charlotte pretended to examine flowers. Working her way slowly toward the old wall, when she finally reached it, her fingers found the brick. It was loose again. Inside was a small USB drive and another note. Building plans on drive. Service tunnel entrance in northeast wing, hidden behind old painting of King George. Leads outside palace grounds. Security routes and shift changes also on drive. If you need to reach me, I'll wait at the cafe across from the park gates every day at noon. But Charlotte, be careful. These people are ruthless. J.W. Charlotte palmed the USB drive and note, slipping them into her pocket. Her hands were shaking. James was still helping her, still putting himself at risk. The weight of it all suddenly felt crushing. She was just a child. How had she ended up in the middle of something so dangerous? At breakfast, she executed the plan perfectly. The book, with the USB drive and note hidden inside, was left on her chair. Her father retrieved it smoothly while Charlotte helped her younger brother with his juice. To anyone watching, it looked like nothing at all. But Charlotte saw the brief moment when her father's fingers tightened on the book. He knew what he was holding now. Evidence. Proof. The rest of the day passed in agonizing normalcy. Lessons. An hour of piano practice. Charlotte went through all of it in a fog of anxiety. What was her father doing with the information? What would he find on that USB drive? She got her answer that evening, just before dinner. Her father came to her room and his face told her everything. He looked older somehow, tired in a way she'd never seen before. "You were right," he said simply, sitting on the edge of her bed. "James found something serious. Someone has been selling information about our security to journalists. Our movements, our schedules, private family details. And there's evidence suggesting they were planning to do worse." Charlotte whispered. Her father shook his head. "That's what we're still trying to determine. The person has been very careful. But because of what you and James uncovered, we now know where to look. Is James in trouble?" "No, not anymore. I've made sure of that." Her father took her hand. "Charlotte, what you did was incredibly brave, but it was also incredibly dangerous. Promise me you won't take risks like this again." Charlotte promised her father she would stay safe. But even as she said the words, she knew the situation was far from over. That night, the palace felt different, like a house holding its breath, waiting for something to break. She learned later, through whispered conversations she wasn't supposed to hear, that her father had gone directly to the head of royal security with the USB drive. An immediate internal investigation had been launched. Several staff members had been quietly pulled from duty for questioning, and James had been contacted, brought in secretly through a private entrance to give his full statement. 3 days passed in tense silence. Charlotte went through her routines, but she could feel the change in atmosphere. Guards watched hallways more carefully. Staff members spoke in lower voices. Her mother kept her closer than usual, finding reasons for them to spend more time together. On the 4th day, Charlotte was in the library doing her reading when she heard a commotion outside. Raised voices, the sound of doors slamming. She crept to the window and saw several police vehicles in the courtyard below. Men in plain clothes were escorting someone out of the palace, a man in handcuffs, his head down. Charlotte didn't recognize him at first. Then he looked up, and her blood ran cold. It was Mr. Davies, her father's deputy, private secretary. The man who had worked for the royal household for 15 years. The man everyone trusted. That evening, Charlotte's father came to her room again. This time, her mother was with him. They both looked exhausted but relieved. "It's over," her father said. "They arrested the person responsible." Charlotte thought of Mr. Davies's face as they led him away. Why did he do it? Her mother sat beside her on the bed. Money, mostly, and resentment. He felt overlooked, unappreciated. So he started selling informations. Small things at first. then bigger secrets. Eventually, he was contacted by people who wanted more than just gossip. They wanted access. Ways to hurt us. James figured it out, Charlotte said. Her father nodded. James noticed inconsistencies in the security reports. Times when cameras were mysteriously offline, doors that should have been locked left open. He started investigating on his own, keeping his suspicions quiet because he didn't know who he could trust. When he got close to the truth, Davies arranged to have him removed, claiming James had broken protocol. It was meant to look routine. But James left me the messages, Charlotte said. And I told you. Yes, her mother said softly, pulling Charlotte close. You did something very brave and very dangerous. I'm not sure whether to be proud or terrified. Both, Charlotte suggested, and her parents laughed despite everything. The following week, something extraordinary happened. James returned to the palace. Not as a guard, he'd been promoted to a position in royal protection, or working directly with the security review team to prevent anything like this from happening again. When Charlotte saw him in the corridor, standing tall in his new role, he gave her that same smile he'd always had. The one that said she wasn't just a princess. She was Charlotte. Thank you, she mouthed silently. He touched 2 fingers to his temple in a small salute. Message received. The palace held a quiet internal ceremony to recognize James's service. It wasn't publicized, that wasn't how these things were done. But Charlotte was allowed to attend, standing beside her parents as James received a commendation for his dedication and courage. Afterward, in a rare moment of privacy, James knelt down to Charlotte's level, just as her father had done in the study. You took a big risk, he said quietly. Bigger than you should have had to take. You took a bigger one, Charlotte replied. James smiled. Fair point. But that's my job. Yours is to be a kid, to grow up safe and happy. I am safe, Charlotte said, because of you. Life at Kensington Palace slowly returned to normal, or what passed for normal in a royal household. The investigation had exposed not just Mr. Davies, but a small network of individuals who had been compromised or recruited over the years. Security protocols were overhauled completely. New staff were brought in, vetted more thoroughly than ever before. The palace became, paradoxically, both more secure and somehow warmer. As if the removal of the rot had allowed trust to begin growing again. Charlotte went back to her lessons, her supervised playtime, her carefully scheduled life. But something fundamental had changed in her. She noticed things now, the way people spoke, the patterns in their behavior, the small moments when something felt off. Her parents noticed it too, this new awareness in their daughter's eyes. Sometimes her mother would watch her with a mixture of pride and sadness, knowing that Charlotte had lost a piece of the innocence that childhood should protect. One afternoon, about a month after the arrests, Charlotte found James in the palace gardens. He was there in his new capacity, reviewing camera placements with a technical team. When he saw her approaching with her governess, he excused himself for a moment. "How are you doing, Princess?" he asked. "I have questions," Charlotte said directly. She'd learned that life was too short for dancing around important things. James glanced at her governess, who nodded and stepped back to give them space, though she remained watchfully nearby. "All right," James said. "Ask, were you scared when they took you away?" James considered this carefully. "Yes," he finally said. "Not for myself, really, but for you and your family. I was scared of what might happen if no one listened. If the truth stayed hidden, but you trusted me to do something about it." "I had to trust someone," James said. "And you were the only one I was certain was safe. The only one who couldn't be part of whatever was happening." Paused. "Does that make sense?" Charlotte nodded slowly. "I think so. You couldn't go to the adults because you didn't know which ones were good. But you knew I was good?" "Exactly." James smiled. "Though I'll admit, I didn't expect an 8-year-old to be quite as capable as you turned out to be. You surprised everyone, in a good way." "In the best way?" They walked together for a few moments in comfortable silence. The autumn had deepened into early winter now. The garden roses had been cut back, and frost touched the grass each morning. Charlotte thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the secrets, the night she'd snuck through the palace to reach her father's study. It felt both very recent and impossibly long ago. "James," she said quietly, "will something like this happen again?" He stopped walking and looked at her seriously. "I hope not. We're doing everything we can to prevent it. But Charlotte, I'm going to be honest with you, because I think you deserve honesty. The world has dangers in it. People aren't always what they seem. And your position means you'll always be more vulnerable to certain threats than other children." "That's not very comforting," Charlotte said. "No," James agreed. "But here's what is comforting. You have people who love you fiercely. Your parents, your siblings, people like me were, all working to keep you safe. And you've proven that you're smart and brave enough to protect yourself when you need to. That combination? That's powerful." Charlotte thought about this. "So I shouldn't be afraid?" "You should be aware," James corrected gently. "There's a difference. Fear paralyzes. Awareness prepares." He smiled. "And between you and me, anyone who underestimates you because of your age is making a serious mistake." Charlotte felt something warm spread through her chest. Pride, maybe, or confidence. "Thank you," she said. "For everything." "Thank you," James replied. "For trusting me, and for being brave enough to act when it mattered." As Charlotte walked back toward the palace with her governess, she looked up at the massive stone building her home. Her prison, her kingdom, depending on how you looked at it, the walls that had felt so safe had turned out to hide dangers. But they also held people worth trusting. People worth fighting for. Years from now, she would look back on this autumn as the season she grew up. Not completely she was still a child after all, with years of innocence ahead of her. But a door had opened in her understanding of the world. She'd learned that danger could wear familiar faces. That courage sometimes meant trusting a message hidden in a wall. That even a princess, especially a princess, sometimes had to take extraordinary risks for the people she loved. The palace corridors welcomed her back with their familiar echoes. Somewhere in those walls, her father was working. Her mother was planning tomorrow's schedule. Her siblings were playing, or studying, or being children in the ways she was learning to preserve for herself. And in the gardens behind her, James stood guard, not just a security officer anymore, but a friend. Someone who had seen her not as a symbol or a title, but as Charlotte. A little girl who'd proven that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important truths. The autumn wind picked up, sending dried leaves skittering across the courtyard stones. Charlotte pulled her jacket tighter and smiled. She was safe. Her family was safe. And that brick in the garden wall? It would stay there, a reminder that sometimes the old ways really are the best ways. Sometimes the most ordinary hiding places protect the most extraordinary secrets. And sometimes when everyone else looks away, it takes a child to see what's really happening and a trusted guard to believe her.